The Curses and the Covenants, A History Weaver Mystery, Book 2, by Connie Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 13. What do you know about the police detachment here, Ma? I asked her with an air of casualness over dinner the next night. She still insisted on cooking for me at least twice a week. She never would come to the Beast for dinner to let me prove to her that I knew how to cook. She'd remained a skeptic who refused to examine the evidence. Easier to maintain one's die-hard beliefs that way. She'd expressed the idea that if I came for dinner 2 nights a week, at least I'd get 2 good meals in the week. I'd given in. I'd resigned myself to reverting to spoiled child status since moving back to Beaver Row. Besides, I still found evenings long and lonely with just me and the Beast. I really did need to think about getting a pet. Of course, my question was bound to spark her overactive curiosity. I don't know the first thing about any of them. I stay out of their way, they stay out of mine. I haven't had any need for them all this time, thank the good Lord. Why are you asking? Have you had a run-in with the police? Well, not as such. I shouldn't have brought it up. Of course I wasn't free to discuss Julia's case, and she wasn't about to let me put it to rest easily, I knew that. I just met one of them the other day, a Constable Martineau, I said vaguely. Oh, yes, Peter Martineau. So you do know him? No, I don't. I remember a little article in the Bugle introducing him and welcoming our newest member of the Beaver Row detachment. Nice-looking fellow. From his picture, at least. Yes, rather, I said, as though the idea hadn't occurred to me until she mentioned it. Reminds me of a little of your father at that age. He does not, I hooted. Daddy had blue eyes and fair hair, well, sandy-colored, light brown, since he didn't have much of any kind since I knew him, but at any rate they certainly don't look alike. My mind flashed to the pictures I had in my mind of my dad. Sad that they were growing so dim. The chuckly, blue-green eyes still stood out. An offhand thought about my own hazel eyes and the nature of genetics wandered idly through my brain. Ma's eyes were baby blue. Brown-eyed kids weren't supposed to come from 2 blue-eyed parents, and hazel eyes looked almost light brown. But I supposed hazel must have been some sort of throwback under blue on the dominance hierarchy. There's something about 'em that's alike anyway, Ma said vaguely. Don't ask me how she could tell from the grainy, poor-quality pictures that would have appeared in the Beaver Row Bugle. How did you meet 'em? She interrogated, getting back to the trail like a hound after a fox, as I knew she would. Just a work-related thing. You know I can't talk about my counselling work with you. Well, why are you bringing it up then? I wasn't. Not the work part of it. You asked. Well, you knew I'd be bound to. So you've gone and got yourself a little crush on the policeman, have you? I could indignantly deny it to her. I certainly denied it to myself. It was a slight attraction, if anything. Definitely not a full-blown crush. More of a curiosity. But there was never any point trying to change Ma's ideas once they planted in her brain. I didn't bother to answer and changed the subject instead. Tell me the story of how you and Daddy met again, I asked her. I've told you 1,000,000 times. Well, I forget some of the details. She sighed and launched into the story I knew she loved to tell. Crisis averted. Sarah and I met at Peggy's for lunch that Saturday. We'd better not talk about work, Sarah warned me. Right, I'm ready to not think about it anyway, I agreed. Julia's mom had cancelled Julia's meetings with me since the accusation had surfaced, which was in some ways a relief. But in other ways it made me fret over the situation even harder. Did her parents think I was to blame for all this? And what was the truth of the matter? Would we ever know? And how would I deal with Julia in future? I felt like I didn't have a handle on any of it, and it was weighing on me. I was ready not to think about it, as in, I was tired of thinking about it, but I was also powerless to stop. Besides, it's out of my hands, now that it's a police investigation, Sarah said. You know she accused her dad of domestic violence, I'm guessing, she continued. So much for not talking about it. I'd gathered as much from the line of questioning. Questioning? By Peter Martineau. Oh, you met Pete. What did you think? He's a new one in town. What did I think? I didn't want to tell Sarah what I thought. I didn't want to tell her that I'd been unable to think while I was having my interview with the officer. Very professional, I said shortly. Very good looking, too, don't you think? She had a little smug look as she said it. Wow, you and my mom, you'd think there were no other good-looking guys in the world. You mean you didn't notice him? In that way, I mean? I have to admit he made me go a little weak in the knees. We kept it totally professional, of course, but I couldn't help but notice the sparks. But, of course, maybe you're too distracted by somebody else that you're seeing lots of now, she smirked at me. She slid one eyelid down in a slow wink. Did Sarah go out of her way to annoy me, or was she just gifted that way without having to work at it? Do you even know if Constable Martineau is single? I asked, using his formal title to distance myself from Sarah's familiar Pete. Yeah, he is. Word on the street has it, at least. I suppose he could have a long-distance thing, but he's not seeing anyone in town, and he didn't bring anyone here with him. At that juncture, our server came to take our orders. For a change, Judith Meredith was out from behind the till and waiting tables that day. As unencouraging as she'd been of any of my attempts at friendliness, at least she'd been civil. But she seemed to pointedly ignore Sarah. She looked only at me or down at her writing pad as we ordered, and when she unsmilingly asked if we were ready to order, she addressed only me, taking my order and then waiting silently for Sarah to speak up. When we'd finished ordering, she turned without saying another word and headed in the direction of the kitchen. Phew, what was that all about? That was cold. I don't remember any bad blood between you and Judith. Is this recent? I asked Sarah. No, it's old news. That started in high school, you don't remember? I didn't remind Sarah that I'd slipped her leash in high school, or rather that she'd found a different friend group. No, what happened? Oh, it was all over Danny. Did you know that he and Judith used to date? News to me. Danny was Sarah's twin brother. I hadn't seen him in years. Probably since high school, come to think of it. Yeah, they broke up in our last year of high school. I don't know why. I think Judith blamed it on me, though. Why would she blame it on you? Well, truth was, I didn't like her dating Danny. Oh? No, I thought she was a bad influence. Really? Judith? She seems harmless enough. Well, it was around the time they started dating that he started getting into drugs. I didn't think that was coincidence. It might have been. I don't remember any sign of her being a druggie. I still don't think it was coincidence. She may have hidden it better. To be honest, it's mutual between us. I'm no fonder of her than she is of me. Makes it awkward in a town this size, but it is what it is. When I think where Danny ended up, I get really angry. He could have had such a bright future. You know what a computer genius he was. He would have loved to get into computer program. He could have gone far, too. I hate drugs, Sarah spat out. I suspected, rather, that Danny had found the drugs on his own as a way of self-medicating. He'd never been diagnosed, but in his teen years he started to show signs of mental illness. He only got worse once he discovered drugs, but I suppose he thought they helped numb the pain. Sarah obviously wanted to believe someone else was to blame for getting Danny addicted. As they had been of his mental illness, Sarah and her parents had been in denial about his drug use until Danny was charged with possession when he was 17. But he had a reputation around school before that of being a major druggie, and he wasn't even trying to hide it. I doubted any of that was Judith's fault. But possibly it was the reason they finally broke up. I briefly wondered if their breakup was the reason for her disappearance halfway through our last year of school together. He'd left town shortly after Judith did, so maybe the breakup was the catalyst that drove them both away. Sarah's tone stated she was finished discussing Judith Meredith. So, any news on Danny? I asked, wondering if this change of subject would be a sore spot with Sarah. But she'd brought his name up. I felt like the door was cracked for the conversation about him. Well, since when? What was the last you heard? Nothing in years, I guess. Haven't really heard any solid news since you got that message from him a few years ago. Well, that was more than a few. Wasn't that right out of high school? That was a long time ago now. Ma told me that nothing has been heard about him since, but I don't even remember when she and I discussed it last, so maybe there's been something new since then. Well, Yes, the big news is that I saw him recently. I mean, not to speak to, but I'm sure it was him. He looked different. Older and more haggard, of course. But I'd know my own twin anywhere, no matter what. Oh, wow. Okay, that is big news. How did that come about? I was in Vancouver for a conference doing some continuing education for work. While I was there, on a whim, I couldn't resist driving through East Hastings. That's the epicenter for homelessness in Vancouver. Yeah, I lived on the Lower Mainland for years, Sarah. Oh, right. Well, anyway, I thought if I were to search for Danny, that would be the place to start. And? You found him? Well, sort of. As I was driving, I saw him panhandling on the sidewalk. It was a quick glimpse because I had traffic behind me and couldn't stop, but I know it was him. Okay, so then? I pulled around the corner to find a place to park so I could run back. And? Her dramatic pauses to wait for audience participation were getting to me. Why couldn't she just tell the story? Well, by the time I'd found a parking spot and ran back to where I saw him, he wasn't there anymore. I asked everyone I could see in that immediate vicinity if they'd seen him, and I described him, but no one would say they had. Even the other homeless guy panhandling there, although he must have seen him. I think he must have thought Danny didn't want to be found and was covering for him. You think Danny saw you as you drove by and took off? I don't know. Might have been coincidence that he disappeared just then. I don't think he'd run from me. But maybe. I know he's changed a lot. He might have been too ashamed to face me. Might have been too painful. The look in her dark chocolate eyes at her last words gave me a quick, acute pang, like a short knife jab in my chest. Crazy as she made me sometimes, I didn't like to see her hurting. She so seldom showed real emotion. But I didn't know what to make of her story. My first reaction was to guess that she'd been looking for Danny, and so she saw him. Or imagined she did. We can convince ourselves of anything we want to be convinced of, and Sarah was not one to question her own beliefs. She was nothing if not decidedly decided. About everything. I wisely did not express any of my thoughts to her. I'd take her story at face value. That's big, that he's still around, and okay. I mean, as okay as he can be. After all this time. Yeah, as you know, I ever only heard from him twice since he left. The first message was to tell me he'd quit school and run away to the city. And then a few months after that, the last message I got was that he was getting kicked out of his apartment in Vancouver because he and the guys he was living with didn't have enough to pay rent. And he likely wouldn't have a phone much longer, so it might be the last I'd hear from him for a while. But he'd be in touch when he could. And of course he said he didn't want anyone to come looking for him. He'd be all right. But your dad did go and look for him, right? He went a few weeks after the fact because, if you'll remember, he was in chemo when Danny left. By that time, there were no leads. I think he just drove around looking for him. It was pretty futile. They notified the police right away that Danny'd run away, as soon as I got that first message, but there's never been any official word on him since he left Beaver Row. The police tried tracing him through bank card activity when my parents reported him, but he never really had any money in his account, and there was never any sign of him that way. He must have stopped using that account and opened a new one. If he ever even found a job, I don't know. Didn't take long before he was out in the streets. I mean, I'm assuming that's where he went when he got kicked out of his apartment. Once you've dropped out of society, it's pretty hard to find someone. The cop said he wasn't considered a minor, being 18 already, so they didn't have any jurisdiction over him leaving home, even if they did find him. They were just trying to help my parents out. But they wouldn't have been able to bring Danny home if he didn't want to come anyway. The story all came back to me as she told it. I'd known all this at one time, but I'd forgotten most of the details. Sarah plainly hadn't. Danny and I hadn't been close, but he was Sarah's twin. That was about as close as siblings could get. She stared blankly past me and out the window when she finished talking. The mention of Uncle Jim's chemo made me swallow hard. He seemed so healthy now it wasn't usually present in my mind that he'd gotten cancer years after my dad had died of cancer. My dad had been too late in discovering his. Uncle Jim had been more diligent thanks to the warning my dad's death had given him. It seemed like he'd beaten it. But the old fear that it would come back would haunt me sometimes. It always seemed to. I'd just rediscovered my Uncle Jim. I didn't want to lose my uncle the same way I'd lost my dad. Judith didn't make another appearance, and another server brought us our bill. I tried to shake off the melancholy Sarah's and my conversation had infected me with as we paid at the till and left Peggy's together. But it followed me like a cloud.